I've seen foreign policy disasters for decades, but this one rewrites the rule book. Nobody expected this. A pattern that was supposed to stay hidden, buried under official narratives and diplomatic language, just got exposed by one of the most respected economists in the world, and the implications are hitting every corner of American foreign policy, from the Middle East to the Arctic. If you want the real story behind American power, economic leverage, and who actually pays the price, subscribe now and drop your location in the comments. If this helped you understand what's really going on, like and share it because more people need to see this. I'm examining how power and money shape international relations. And today I want to break down what Jeffrey Sachs just revealed, what's really happening across Venezuela, Iran, and Greenland. Who benefits from these policies? Who pays the price, and how deeper forces are driving these outcomes? You've been sold a story of American strength and moral clarity, the idea that the United States intervenes in foreign countries to protect democracy, defend human rights, and maintain global stability. It's a narrative where America acts as the world's police officer, reluctantly but necessarily stepping in when bad actors threaten international order. The administration frames these interventions as defensive measures, protecting American interests and values. We're told that countries like Venezuela are failed states run by dictators, that Iran poses an existential threat to regional stability, that Greenland, its resources must be secured for national security. The logic is transactional and morally straightforward. Bad regimes must be pressured, sanctioned, isolated, or in extreme cases, overthrown. It assumes that American power, when wielded decisively, can reshape entire regions according to our interests and values. On the surface, this sounds reasonable. Who wouldn't want to oppose dictatorships? Who wouldn't support efforts to counter genuine threats to regional peace? We were meant to see these policies as necessary, even if uncomfortable exercises of American leadership in a dangerous world. But when you look at the actual outcomes, at the pattern that repeats across decades and continents, a very different story emerges. This wasn't about democracy or human rights or stability. It was about control, resources, and geopolitical dominance. And I want to walk you through why, because it exposes a fundamental truth about how American foreign policy actually operates versus how it's presented to the public. What Jeffrey Sachs revealed is the opposite of what mainstream narratives claim. When the United States targets countries like Venezuela, Iran, or shows interest in places like Greenland, they are primarily motivated by spreading democracy or countering threats. They're pursuing strategic resources and geopolitical positioning. This isn't a display of moral leadership. It's a revelation of how great power competition actually works. The markets and international observers recognize this immediately, even if American media coverage doesn't. The moment these interventions are announced, the targeted countries' economies destabilize, not because of their own failures, but because of deliberately imposed external pressure. Venezuela's oil wealth, Iran's strategic location and energy resources, Greenland's rare earth minerals, and Arctic positioning. Let that sink in. This is the hidden story most mainstream coverage missed. To understand how systematic this pattern is, you have to understand how resource competition shapes modern geopolitics. This isn't about isolated incidents or responses to specific threats. It's a consistent strategic framework that's been applied for decades. The United States identifies countries with valuable strategic resources or critical geographic positions, frames their governments as threats or failures regardless of actual conditions on the ground, applies economic pressure, through sanctions that devastate civilian populations and waits for either regime change or capitulation. That's a fact. No amount of diplomatic language or humanitarian rhetoric can change. Sachs understood this perfectly after watching it play out repeatedly. American policymakers apparently either don't see the pattern or choose to ignore its human costs. The immediate blow from these policies is rarely felt by the targeted regimes themselves. Sanctions don't hurt dictators. They hurt ordinary people. Venezuelan families can't access medicine. Iranian businesses collapse under banking restrictions. The population suffer while political leaders remain insulated. The irony is striking. While American officials claim to support the people of these countries against their oppressive governments, the policies actually strengthen those governments by creating siege mentalities and giving authoritarian leaders external enemies to blame for economic hardships. We need to step back and look at the system behind this. International relations operate on principles of sovereignty and non-interference, at least officially, but great powers have always found ways to justify intervention when strategic interests are at stake. The modern tool isn't military invasion as much as economic warfare. Sanctions, asset freezes, banking restrictions, trade embargoes, these mechanisms allow powerful countries to devastate targeted nations without firing a shot. This brings us to the concept of economic coercion. Economic coercion means using financial and trade systems as weapons to force political outcomes. If a country steps out of line on issues unrelated to trade, like domestic policy or regional alliances, they can face economic punishment. If a country controls resources you want access to, you can't simply take them through military force anymore without enormous international backlash. The markets know this, international institutions know this. So when the United States announces sanctions or threatens intervention, everyone understands the real motivation, even if it's wrapped in humanitarian language. In the case of Venezuela, the United States thought it had leverage through sanctions that would quickly topple the Maduro government. But the real leverage lay in whether the Venezuelan people would support foreign intervention against their own country, regardless of how they felt about their government. You can't sanction a population into supporting regime change imposed from outside. The mechanism at work is straightforward. Economic pressure creates suffering. Suffering creates instability. Instability creates opportunities for intervention, but it also creates resistance and makes populations rally around their governments against external threats, even when those governments are unpopular. This isn't a matter of policy choices or diplomatic strategy, it's structural reality, geography, geology, and resource distribution. You can't change where oil deposits exist. You can't relocate rare earth minerals. You can't redraw shipping lanes through the Arctic. Countries that control these resources have inherent leverage, and no amount of military or economic pressure can fundamentally alter that geographic reality. Iran understood this perfectly with its control of the Strait of Hormuz. Venezuela understood it with its oil reserves. Greenland's value lies in resources and positioning that exist regardless of who governs or what policies they pursue. This keeps happening because American foreign policy operates on assumptions that haven't been updated for modern geopolitical realities. You hear about threats to American interests and assume military or economic dominance can solve the problem. That's not how it works. Countries with strategic resources or positions have agency. They can find alternative partners, build resilience to pressure, or simply wait out administrations that impose sanctions. China and Russia actively court countries under American pressure offering economic partnerships. without political conditions. This creates alternatives that didn't exist during the Cold War, fundamentally changing the calculus of economic coercion. And this raises the most important question in political economy: who benefits and who pays? When policies like sanctions or intervention threats are announced, American officials want you to believe that targeted regimes will suffer while their populations will somehow benefit from pressure that forces reform. But that's not how economic coercion works. The targeted regimes didn't pay. If anything, they consolidated power by pointing to external enemies. The real winners were geopolitical competitors who gained new allies, defense contractors who profit from increased military spending, and political figures who use foreign policy crises to rally domestic support. The people who pay are always the same: ordinary citizens in targeted countries who lose access to medicine, food security, and economic opportunity. Venezuelan families already struggling under economic mismanagement face additional devastation from sanctions that cut them off from international markets. Iranian entrepreneurs see their businesses collapse because they can't access banking systems. For them, American foreign policy isn't an abstraction or a noble effort to spread democracy. It's an existential threat, and they have no way to escape the consequences or influence the policies, destroying their livelihoods. What makes this especially cruel is that the people paying the price had nothing to do with causing the situations that prompted intervention. Venezuelan citizens didn't choose to have the world's largest oil reserves. Iranian families didn't decide their country would sit at a critical geographic crossroads. They're caught in the crossfire of great power competition. They didn't start and can't control. That's always how bad foreign policy works. The elites who promote it never pay the price. American officials won't miss meals because Venezuelan children can't access medicine. Defense contractors won't struggle financially because Iranian businesses collapse. But ordinary people, the ones who just want to live their lives, raise their families, and pursue basic economic security, they're left to suffer the consequences of policies made in distant capitals by people who will never experience the results of their decisions. This isn't just a story about Venezuela, Iran, or Greenland. It's a story about how great powers operate when they believe their size and strength exempt them from the normal rules of international relations. And it exposes a fundamental truth about American foreign policy. Rhetoric about democracy and human rights often masks straightforward competition for strategic resources and geopolitical positioning. This pattern repeats across history and geography. Countries that control valuable resources or strategic locations face pressure, intervention, or destabilization efforts regardless of their actual governance or threat levels. Those that comply with American strategic interests receive support even when their governments are authoritarian or abusive. Those that resist, even when they have legitimate sovereignty claims, face isolation and economic warfare. The real question isn't whether specific regimes are good or bad, democratic or authoritarian. It's whether the international system will be based on genuine respect for sovereignty and multilateral cooperation, or whether great powers will continue using economic and military leverage to reshape other countries according to their interests. Will the United States learn from decades of failed interventions and sanctions that rarely achieve stated goals while causing enormous human suffering? Or will it double down on the assumption that enough pressure will eventually force compliance? Will American foreign policy adapt to a multipolar world where economic coercion has diminishing returns? Or will it keep applying Cold War frameworks to 21st century realities? Jeffrey Sachs didn't need to shout or exaggerate to make his point. The pattern speaks for itself once you stop accepting official narratives at face value. He proved that paying attention to actual outcomes rather than stated intentions reveals how foreign policy really operates. That's a reality American policymakers can't escape, even if they refuse to acknowledge it publicly. And it's a lesson that populations in Venezuela, Iran, and potentially Greenland are learning in the hardest possible way through economic devastation and geopolitical instability they didn't choose and can't control. The world is watching not just what America says, but what it does and who suffers as a result.